The autumn wind whistled through the gaps in the trailer's aluminum siding, carrying with it the scent of burning leaves and the distant hum of interstate traffic. 14-year-old Ethan Rodriguez sat cross-legged on his narrow bed, fingers dancing across the 3 remaining strings of his father's old acoustic guitar. The instrument had seen better days. Its body bore scratches from years of use, and the missing strings left it sounding hollow and incomplete, much like Ethan felt since his father's death 6 months earlier. "Ethan, turn that thing down!" His mother Sarah called from the kitchen, her voice strained with exhaustion. Mrs. Patterson next door is trying to get her baby to sleep. Ethan's fingers stilled on the fretboard. Through the thin walls he could hear his mother's muffled sobs, the same tears that came every evening when she thought he wasn't listening. The insurance money from the construction accident was running out, and despite working double shifts at the local diner, Sarah Rodriguez was fighting a losing battle against mounting bills and grief. "Sorry, Mom," Ethan whispered, though he knew she couldn't hear him. He gently placed the guitar against the wall, its silence somehow louder than the music had been. The Rodriguez family's troubles had begun on a rainy Tuesday morning, when a crane malfunctioned at the downtown construction site where Miguel Rodriguez worked as a foreman. The accident made front-page news in the Millfield Gazette for exactly 1 day before being forgotten by everyone except the family left behind. Miguel had been the rock of their small household, working 16-hour days to provide for his family, while still finding time to teach Ethan basic guitar chords in the evenings. "Music is the language of the soul, mijo," Miguel had often said, his calloused hands guiding Ethan's smaller fingers to the proper positions. "When words fail us, music speaks." Now, sitting in the cramped trailer that served as their home, Ethan wondered if his father's soul was trying to speak to him through the broken strings of the old guitar. The instrument had been Miguel's most prized possession, a gift from his own father who had crossed the border from Mexico with nothing but dreams and determination. A knock at the front door interrupted Ethan's melancholy thoughts. Through the thin curtains, he could see Maya Patterson's familiar silhouette. Maya was his age, with auburn hair that caught the light like fire and green eyes that seemed to hold more wisdom than her 14 years should allow. She lived in the trailer next to theirs with her grandmother, Ruby Patterson, and despite their own financial struggles, the Patterson women had become like extended family to the Rodriguez household since Miguel's death. "Ethan," Maya's voice carried through the door with its usual enthusiasm. "You've got to see this." Ethan opened the door to find Maya practically bouncing with excitement, a crumpled flyer clutched in her hands. Her cheeks were flushed from running, and her breath came out in small white puffs in the cool October air. "What's got you so worked up?" Ethan asked, though Maya's energy was infectious, and he found himself smiling for the first time in days. "Look at this." Maya thrust the flyer into his hands. "Reba McEntire is coming to the community center. She's doing some kind of charity thing next Saturday." Ethan's eyes widened as he read the announcement. The flyer was professionally printed, a stark contrast to the usual hand-photocopied notices that adorned the community center's bulletin board. It announced an intimate acoustic performance and meet and greet with the country music legend, with all proceeds going to support local families affected by workplace accidents. "This is about the construction accident, isn't it?" Ethan said quietly, the connection becoming clear. "Someone organized this for families like ours." Maya nodded solemnly. "Grandma Ruby heard about it at the grocery store. Apparently, some big-shot music producer from Nashville has family here in Millfield. He reached out to Reba's people, and she agreed to come." Sarah appeared in the doorway behind Ethan, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her once bright eyes had grown dim with grief and worry, but Maya's presence always seemed to lift her spirits slightly. "What are you two so excited about?" Sarah asked, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Reba McEntire is coming to town, Mrs. Rodriguez," Maya explained, handing Sarah the flyer. "She's doing a concert to help families like yours." Sarah's expression shifted as she read the announcement. Ethan watched as a mixture of emotions played across her face: gratitude, embarrassment, and something that might have been hope. "That's very kind," Sarah said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't think we'll be attending." "Mom, why not?" Ethan protested. Dad loved country music. He used to sing Reba's songs while he worked on the guitar. "Because, mijo," Sarah said gently, "we can't afford the luxury of entertainment right now. Every dollar needs to go toward keeping a roof over our heads." The weight of their financial reality settled over the conversation like a heavy blanket. Maya looked between mother and son, her young face creased with determination. "What if I told you the tickets were free?" Maya said with a mischievous grin. "Grandma Ruby volunteers at the community center, and she said they're not charging admission. It's a charity event, Mrs. Rodriguez. They want people like you to come." Sarah's resistance wavered. "I don't know, Maya. We don't have anything appropriate to wear to meet someone famous." "You look fine just the way you are," Ethan said firmly, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "Dad always said music doesn't care what you're wearing. It only cares what's in your heart." That evening, after Maya had returned home and Sarah had fallen asleep on the couch with unpaid bills scattered around her like fallen leaves, Ethan retrieved his father's guitar. In the dim light of the trailer's single lamp, he tried to coax a melody from the remaining strings. The sound was thin and incomplete, but it carried the ghost of better days. As he played, Ethan found himself thinking about the upcoming event. He had seen Reba McEntire on television and heard her songs on the radio. But the idea of seeing her in person, in their small community center, seemed almost surreal. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it would be like to perform on stage, to have people listen to his music the way they listened to hers. The fantasy faded as reality reasserted itself. His guitar was broken, his family was broke, and his dreams felt as distant as the stars visible through the trailer's small window. But somewhere deep in his heart, a small flame of hope flickered, fed by the memory of his father's words and the promise of music that could speak when words failed. The following morning brought news that would change everything, though Ethan didn't know it yet. Sarah returned from her morning shift at the diner with an unusual lightness in her step. "Mrs. Walsh stopped by the restaurant today," Sarah announced as she hung up her coat. "You remember Dorothy Walsh, don't you? She used to teach music at the high school before she retired." Ethan nodded. Mrs. Walsh was a fixture in Millfield, a woman in her 70s who had taught music to 3 generations of local children. She lived alone in a small house on Maple Street, and rumor had it that she had once played piano for some famous singers in Nashville before returning home to teach. "She heard about the Reba McEntire event," Sarah continued, "and she wanted to know if you'd be interested in helping with the setup. Apparently they need someone to help move equipment and tune instruments." Ethan's heart leaped. "She wants me to help with the instruments?" "That's what she said. She remembered how much you loved music, and she thought you might enjoy being involved." Sarah paused, studying her son's face. "She also mentioned something about payment." "Nothing much, but enough to help with groceries this week." The opportunity was more than Ethan had dared to hope for. Not only would he get to attend the event, but he'd also be working directly with musical equipment. Maybe he'd even get a chance to see professional guitars up close. "Can I do it, Mom?" Ethan asked, though his excitement was tempered by concern for his mother's feelings. He knew she was struggling with accepting help from others. Sarah's smile was genuine this time, reaching her eyes for the first time in weeks. "Of course you can, mijo. Your father would be proud to know you're helping with a music event." That afternoon, Ethan walked the 6 blocks to Dorothy Walsh's house on Maple Street. The neighborhood was a stark contrast to the trailer park where he lived. Small but well-maintained houses with neat yards and picket fences that spoke of middle-class stability. Mrs. Walsh's house was painted a cheerful yellow, with flower boxes beneath the windows and a porch swing that swayed gently in the autumn breeze. Dorothy Walsh answered the door before Ethan had a chance to knock. She was a petite woman with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that sparkled with intelligence and kindness. Despite her age, she moved with the graceful precision of someone who had spent decades conducting orchestras and teaching young musicians. "Ethan Rodriguez," she said warmly, as if greeting an old friend. "I was hoping you'd come by. Please, come in." The interior of Mrs. Walsh's house was like stepping into a musical museum. Sheet music covered every available surface, and the walls were lined with photographs of her former students, many of whom had gone on to successful careers in music. In the corner of the living room sat a beautiful baby grand piano, its ebony surface gleaming in the afternoon light. "I heard about your father," Mrs. Walsh said gently as she led Ethan to the kitchen. "Miguel was a good man. He used to stop by sometimes when he was working on the Wilson's roof repair. We'd talk about music, and he always spoke about how proud he was of your interest in guitar." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. "He taught me everything I know." "I'm sure he did," Mrs. Walsh said, pouring 2 glasses of lemonade. "And I'd like to help you continue learning, if you're interested. But first, let's talk about Saturday's event." For the next hour, Mrs. Walsh explained what would be involved in helping with the charity concert. Ethan would arrive early to help set up chairs, check microphone connections, and assist with tuning any instruments that needed it. Most importantly, he'd be working alongside the sound technicians who traveled with Reba's small acoustic setup. "It's not glamorous work," Mrs. Walsh warned, "but you'll learn more about professional music production in one day than most people learn in years. Are you interested?" Ethan's response was immediate and enthusiastic. "Yes, ma'am. Absolutely." As he prepared to leave, Mrs. Walsh walked him to the door. "Ethan," she said thoughtfully, "bring your father's guitar on Saturday. I'd like to see it." "It's pretty beat up," Ethan admitted, embarrassed by the instrument's condition. 3 of the strings are broken, and the tuning pegs are loose." Mrs. Walsh's eyes twinkled. "Some of the most beautiful music comes from imperfect instruments. Trust me on this one." Walking home as the sun set behind the Tennessee hills, Ethan felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced since his father's death. For the first time in months, he was looking forward to something, and the broken guitar waiting in his trailer no longer seemed like a symbol of loss, but a bridge to possibility. The week passed slowly, each day bringing Ethan closer to the event that would change his life forever. He spent his evenings practicing on the 3-stringed guitar, working out melodies and chord progressions that worked within the instrument's limitations. Maya often joined him, sitting on the steps of their trailer and listening as he played, offering encouragement and feedback. "You're getting really good," Maya said one evening as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. "Even with those missing strings, you make that guitar sing." Ethan paused mid-song, his fingers still positioned on the fretboard. "Sometimes I wonder what Dad would think about all this. About Mom struggling, about us living here, about me trying to play his guitar when I can barely afford to fix it." Maya was quiet for a moment, considering her words carefully. "I think he'd be proud of how you're trying to keep his memory alive through music. And I think he'd want you to keep playing, no matter what." As Saturday morning dawned clear and crisp, Ethan woke before his alarm, excitement and nervousness battling in his stomach. He carefully packed his father's guitar in its worn case and walked to the community center, arriving just as the sun painted the building's brick facade in golden light. The transformation was already underway. Professional lighting equipment was being set up by a crew from Nashville, and a small stage had been assembled at one end of the room. Dorothy Walsh was directing the operation with the efficiency of someone who had organized countless performances over the years. "Ethan," she called when she spotted him. "Perfect timing. Come meet Jake Morrison. He's Reba's sound engineer." Jake Morrison was a friendly man in his 30s, with calloused hands and an easy smile. He immediately put Ethan at ease, explaining how sound checks worked and showing him how to properly coil cables and position microphones. "So you play guitar?" Jake asked when he noticed Ethan's case. "A little," Ethan replied modestly. "My dad taught me some basics before he passed away." "I'm sorry for your loss," Jake said sincerely. "Music can be great therapy for grief. Mind if I take a look at your instrument?" Ethan hesitated, embarrassed by the guitar's condition, but Jake's genuine interest was encouraging. He opened the case and carefully lifted out the battered acoustic guitar. Jake's expression grew serious as he examined the instrument. "This is a 1970s Yamaha FG 180, he said with surprise. These are actually pretty valuable guitars when they're in good condition. Your dad had excellent taste." "Really?" Ethan asked, surprised. He had always known the guitar was special to his father, but he'd assumed it was more sentimental value than actual worth. "Absolutely. With some work, this could be a fantastic instrument again." Jake carefully tuned the 3 remaining strings and played a few chords. Despite its limitations, the guitar's rich tone was evident. "You know what? Let me see what I can do about getting some strings on this." As Jake worked on restringing the guitar, Ethan helped Dorothy Walsh arrange chairs and prepare the space for the evening's performance. The community center, which usually hosted bingo nights and town meetings, was being transformed into an intimate concert venue. By late afternoon, everything was ready. Ethan had learned more about sound equipment and stage setup than he'd ever imagined possible, and his father's guitar now had all 6 strings for the first time in months. When he played it, the full, rich sound brought tears to his eyes. "She sounds beautiful," Dorothy Walsh said, appearing beside him as he tested the newly strung instrument. "Your father would be so proud." As the sun began to set, people started arriving for the concert. Ethan was amazed by the turnout. It seemed like half of Millfield had come to see Reba McEntire. He spotted his mother and Maya entering together, both dressed in their Sunday best. Sarah's face showed a mixture of nervousness and excitement that Ethan hadn't seen since before his father's death. Then, just as the last rays of sunlight faded from the windows, a small tour bus pulled up outside the community center. Ethan's heart began to race as he realized that country music royalty was about to walk through the same doors he used for 4-H meetings and high school basketball tryouts. The moment that would change his life forever was about to begin. Reba McEntire stepped off the tour bus with the kind of presence that seemed to fill the entire parking lot. Even in casual jeans and a simple black sweater, she commanded attention, her famous red hair catching the glow of the streetlights, her smile warm and genuine as she greeted the small crowd that had gathered outside the community center. Ethan watched from the doorway, his father's guitar clutched tightly in his hands, as one of country music's biggest stars made her way toward their humble venue. "She's smaller than I expected," Maya whispered, appearing at Ethan's shoulder. She had convinced her grandmother to let her help with the final preparations, and her excitement was barely contained. "But she looks just like she does on TV," Ethan replied, his voice filled with awe. He had seen Reba McEntire perform on countless television specials and award shows, but seeing her in person made everything feel surreal. Dorothy Walsh appeared beside them, smoothing her dress nervously. Despite her decades of experience in music education, even she seemed slightly starstruck by the presence of such a major celebrity in their small town. "Remember, Ethan?" Mrs. Walsh said quietly. "Ms. McEntire is here to help families like yours. She's chosen to spend her evening with us, so let's make sure everything goes smoothly." Jake Morrison emerged from the community center to greet his boss, and Ethan watched as Reba's professional demeanor immediately put everyone at ease. She shook hands with Dorothy Walsh, thanked the volunteers, and took a moment to speak with several of the families who had been affected by the construction accident. "Mrs. Rodriguez?" Reba's voice was warm and slightly husky as she approached Sarah, who was standing nervously near the entrance. "I'm so sorry for your loss. I understand your husband was well respected in the community." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she managed to maintain her composure. "Thank you, Ms. McEntire. Miguel would have been so excited to know you were here. He was a big fan of your music." "Please, call me Reba," she said with genuine warmth. "And I'd love to hear more about Miguel tonight. Sometimes the best way to honor someone is to share their story." As Reba moved through the crowd, greeting families and volunteers, Ethan found himself struck by her authenticity. There was no pretense or celebrity attitude, just a genuinely kind woman who seemed to care about each person she met. The concert began at 7 o'clock sharp. Reba took the small stage with just her acoustic guitar and a single spotlight, creating an intimate atmosphere that made the community center feel like someone's living room. Her voice filled the space with songs both classic and new, each one delivered with the emotional honesty that had made her a legend. Ethan found himself captivated not just by her performance, but by her technique. He watched how she held her guitar, how her fingers moved across the fretboard, how she used her voice to convey emotion. Sitting in the back of the room with his father's guitar across his lap, he tried to absorb every lesson he could from watching a master at work. "She makes it look so easy," Maya whispered during a brief intermission. "That's because she's been doing it for 30 years, Ethan replied, though he was thinking the same thing. Reba's performance seemed effortless, but Ethan could see the years of practice and dedication behind every note. Halfway through the concert, Reba paused between songs to address the audience directly. "You know, I've been blessed to play in some of the most famous venues in the world," she said, her voice carrying easily through the room without amplification. "The Grand Ole Opry, Madison Square Garden, huge arenas filled with thousands of people. But there's something special about intimate gatherings like this one." She adjusted her guitar and continued, "Music is supposed to bring people together, especially during difficult times. I'm honored to be here with all of you tonight, and I want you to know that this community's strength and resilience is an inspiration." Reba launched into "The Greatest Man I Never Knew," a song about loss and regret that resonated deeply with many in the audience. Ethan saw his mother wiping away tears, and he felt his own eyes growing moist as the lyrics seemed to speak directly to his grief over his father's death. After the official concert ended, Reba spent nearly an hour meeting individually with families, signing autographs, and taking photos. The line moved slowly as she took time to have meaningful conversations with each person, asking about their lives and their losses with genuine interest. When it was finally the Rodriguez family's turn, Sarah approached nervously with Ethan beside her. Maya had volunteered to wait nearby, giving the family their moment with the star. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Reba said warmly, rising from her chair to embrace Sarah. "I'm so glad we got to meet tonight. How are you holding up?" "Some days are better than others," Sarah replied honestly. "But having support from the community and events like this, it helps more than you know." Reba turned her attention to Ethan, noticing the guitar case in his hands. "And you must be the musician I've heard about. Jake mentioned that you helped with the setup today." Ethan felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I just helped move some equipment, nothing special." "Jake also told me about your guitar," Reba continued with a smile. "He said it's a beautiful instrument with an interesting story. Would you mind if I took a look?" With trembling hands, Ethan opened the case and lifted out his father's guitar. Even with the new strings Jake had provided, the instrument showed its age and wear. Scratches covered the body, and the finish had worn thin in places where Miguel's hands had rested during countless hours of practice. Reba took the guitar with reverence, her experienced hands immediately recognizing its quality despite its condition. She played a few soft chords, and even in her hands, the instrument seemed to come alive. "This is a wonderful guitar," she said sincerely. "Your father had excellent taste. These Yamaha FG 180s from the 70s have incredible tone." She looked up at Ethan with genuine interest. "Do you play often?" "Every day," Ethan replied, finding his voice. "Dad taught me some chords before he passed. I'm still learning." "Would you play something for me?" Reba asked, offering the guitar back to him. Ethan's heart began to race. The idea of performing in front of Reba McEntire, even informally, seemed impossible. "I'm not very good yet," he protested. "Music isn't about being perfect," Reba said gently. "It's about sharing what's in your heart. I'd love to hear whatever you'd like to play." Sarah squeezed Ethan's shoulder encouragingly, and he could see Maya watching from nearby with excitement and anticipation. Taking a deep breath, Ethan accepted the guitar and tried to calm his nerves. He had been working on a simple finger-picking pattern that his father had taught him, built around basic chords, but arranged in a way that created a beautiful, melancholy melody. It wasn't complex, but it was honest, a musical expression of his grief and his hope for the future. As Ethan began to play, the conversations around them gradually quieted. His technique was still developing, and he stumbled slightly on one chord change. But the emotion in his playing was unmistakable. The melody seemed to carry the weight of his father's memory and his family's struggles, but also a quiet determination to keep moving forward. When he finished, there was a moment of profound silence. Then Reba began to applaud, and the rest of the room followed suit. "That was beautiful, Ethan," Reba said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your father taught you well, and I can hear the music in your soul. Don't ever stop playing." As the evening wound down and families began to leave, Ethan helped Jake Morrison pack up the sound equipment. His head was still spinning from the surreal experience of performing for one of his musical heroes. "You've got real talent, kid," Jake said as they coiled the last of the cables. "Keep working at it, and who knows where music might take you." Dorothy Walsh approached as they finished cleaning up. "Ethan, would you mind staying for just a few more minutes? Ms. McEntire wanted to speak with you privately before she leaves." Ethan's mother and Maya had already headed home, exhausted from the emotional evening, but buoyed by the sense of community support they had felt. Ethan found himself alone with Reba, Jake, and Mrs. Walsh as the community center returned to its normal, quiet state. "Ethan," Reba said, sitting down in one of the folding chairs they had set up for the concert, "I want to talk to you about something important. That guitar of your father's is special, but it's seen better days. More importantly, I can tell that music means everything to you." She paused, seeming to consider her words carefully. "I know what it's like to have big dreams and limited resources. When I was starting out, I didn't have much either. But I had people who believed in me and helped me along the way." Reba walked over to where her own guitar case sat near the stage. "This guitar has been with me for almost 20 years, she said, opening the case to reveal a stunning Martin D28 acoustic guitar. The instrument was clearly well cared for, but showed the gentle wear that comes from years of professional use. "I bought this guitar in 1975 when I was just starting to make it in Nashville," Reba continued. "It's been on stages all over the world, in recording studios, and in my home when I needed comfort during difficult times. It's part of my story." Ethan stared at the beautiful instrument, not understanding where the conversation was heading. "But stories are meant to be shared," Reba said with a smile. "And sometimes, the best way to honor the past is to invest in the future." She carefully lifted the Martin D28 from its case and held it out to Ethan. "I want you to have this guitar." Ethan's mouth fell open in shock. "Ms. McEntire, I can't. That's worth more than my family makes in a year. I couldn't possibly accept something like that." "Please, call me Reba," she said with a gentle laugh. "And yes, you can accept it. In fact, I insist. But there are conditions." Dorothy Walsh watched the exchange with tears in her eyes, understanding the magnitude of the moment. "First," Reba continued, "you have to promise me you'll keep playing and learning. This guitar deserves to be in the hands of someone who will use it to create music, not just admire it on a wall." Ethan nodded mutely, still unable to believe what was happening. "Second, if you ever make it as a musician, and I mean if, not when, because this business is unpredictable, I want you to remember this moment and help other young musicians the way I'm trying to help you tonight. And third," Reba said, her voice growing serious, "I want you to know that this gift isn't charity. It's an investment. I see something special in you, Ethan Rodriguez. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you that your dreams are too big." With shaking hands, Ethan accepted the guitar. It felt different from his father's instrument, newer, more perfectly balanced, with a tone that was rich and clear even without amplification. But more than that, it felt like possibility made tangible. "I don't know what to say," Ethan whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Say you'll make me proud," Reba replied with a smile. "And say you'll take care of that guitar. It's got a lot more music left in it." Jake Morrison documented the moment with his phone, taking a photo of Reba presenting the guitar to Ethan. "This is going to be a special memory," he said. "Make sure you frame this picture, kid." As Reba prepared to leave, she gave Ethan her contact information. Not her personal details, but a way to reach her management company. "I want updates," she said. And if you ever make it to Nashville, look me up. I'd love to hear how you're progressing." The tour bus pulled away from the community center at nearly 11 o'clock, leaving Ethan standing in the parking lot with a guitar worth more than his family's annual income and a head full of dreams that suddenly seemed less impossible. Dorothy Walsh offered to drive him home, and during the short trip to the trailer park, she was unusually quiet. Finally, as they pulled up to the Rodriguez family's modest home, she spoke. "Ethan, what happened tonight is extraordinary, but it's also just the beginning. That guitar is a wonderful gift, but it won't make you a better musician by itself. Are you prepared for the work it's going to take?" Ethan looked down at the Martin D28 in its professional case, then back at Mrs. Walsh. "I think so. I mean, I want to be, but I don't really know what I'm doing." Mrs. Walsh smiled for the first time since they'd left the community center. "Then perhaps it's time you started taking proper lessons. If you're interested, I'd be willing to work with you. No charge, of course. Consider it my contribution to Reba's investment in your future." As Ethan carried his new guitar into the trailer, he found his mother waiting up for him, still dressed in her evening clothes and sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. "How do you feel, mijo?" Sarah asked, studying her son's face with concern and curiosity. "Like my whole life just changed," Ethan replied honestly. "And like I have no idea what happens next." Sarah rose and embraced her son, the expensive guitar case between them. "Your father always said that music would be important in your life. I think tonight, his prophecy came true." That night, Ethan lay awake in his narrow bed, the Martin D28 carefully stored in its case beside him. Through the thin walls of the trailer, he could hear his mother moving around the kitchen, probably unable to sleep as well. Outside, the sounds of the trailer park continued, distant televisions, the occasional car, the normal rhythms of working-class life. But inside Ethan's heart, everything had changed. For the first time since his father's death, he felt like the future held genuine possibility. The guitar beside his bed wasn't just an instrument, it was a bridge between the life he had known and the life he might be able to create. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. But tonight, as he drifted off to sleep, Ethan Rodriguez allowed himself to dream about stages and spotlights, about music that could touch people's hearts the way Reba's had touched his. And somewhere in those dreams, he could hear his father's voice, proud and encouraging, telling him that music truly was the language of the soul. The guitar that would change everything was now his to play. 6 months after the night that changed his life, Ethan Rodriguez had developed calluses on his fingertips that rivaled those of musicians twice his age. Every day after school, he walked the familiar route to Dorothy Walsh's house on Maple Street, the Martin D28 slung across his shoulder in its professional case. The guitar had become an extension of himself, as natural as breathing and twice as necessary. Dorothy Walsh's living room had been transformed into a makeshift music conservatory. Sheet music covered every surface. A metronome ticked steadily on the piano, and chord charts were taped to the walls alongside photographs of her former students. The afternoon sun streaming through her lace curtains created the perfect atmosphere for learning, and Ethan had come to think of this room as a sanctuary where his musical education was blossoming. "Your fingerpicking has improved dramatically," Mrs. Walsh observed, as Ethan worked through a complex Travis picking pattern. At 73, her hearing remained sharp, and she could detect the slightest imperfection in timing or technique. "But you're still rushing the bass line. Remember, the thumb sets the tempo for everything else." Ethan slowed his playing, focusing on the steady alternating bass pattern that formed the foundation of the fingerstyle technique. It was one of many skills Mrs. Walsh had been teaching him, building upon the basic chords his father had shown him and expanding his understanding of music theory, rhythm, and melody. "Better," Mrs. Walsh said approvingly. "Now, let's work on your original composition. Play what you have so far." Over the past 2 months, Ethan had been working on his first complete original song. It was a slow, contemplative piece about loss and hope, inspired by his father's death and his mother's ongoing struggle to rebuild their lives. The lyrics were simple, but heartfelt, and the melody showcased the Martin D28's rich, warm tone. As Ethan played, Mrs. Walsh listened with the focused attention of a professional musician. She had been teaching for over 40 years, and she could recognize raw talent when she heard it. What impressed her most about Ethan wasn't just his technical progress, though that had been remarkable, but his instinctive understanding of how to use music to express emotion. "The bridge needs work," she said when he finished. "You're moving from the verse to the chorus too abruptly. Think about creating a musical journey that takes the listener along with you." Ethan nodded, making mental notes about the song's structure. These lessons with Mrs. Walsh had become the highlight of his week. Not only was he learning to play guitar at a level he had never imagined possible, but he was also discovering the broader world of music, theory, composition, performance techniques, and the business side of the industry. "Mrs. Walsh," Ethan said during a break between exercises, "do you think I'm good enough to play in front of people? I mean, besides that night with Reba." Dorothy Walsh set down her cup of tea and studied her young pupil with thoughtful eyes. "What kind of performance are you thinking about?" "The high school talent show is coming up in 2 months, Ethan explained. "Maya thinks I should enter, but I'm not sure I'm ready." "Play your original song again," Mrs. Walsh instructed. "But this time, don't think about technique or chord progressions. Just play it like you're telling someone a story that matters to you." Ethan repositioned the Martin D28 and began to play. This time, instead of focusing on the mechanics of the music, he let himself feel the emotion behind the lyrics. He thought about his father's hands guiding his fingers to the frets, about his mother's tears when she thought he wasn't looking, about the moment Reba McEntire had seen something in him worth nurturing. When he finished, Mrs. Walsh was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she smiled with the satisfaction of a teacher who has witnessed a breakthrough. "Now you're ready," she said simply. "That wasn't just playing, that was music. There's a difference, and you've just discovered what it is." The Spring Talent Show at Millfield High School was held annually in the school's modest auditorium, a space that seated about 300 people and doubled as the venue for graduation ceremonies and community meetings. For most students, it was a chance to show off dance routines, comedy acts, or cover songs. For Ethan, it represented something much more significant, his first real test as a performer. Maya Patterson had been his biggest advocate for entering the competition. Now 15 and more confident than ever, she had developed into Ethan's closest friend and most trusted critic. She attended many of his practice sessions with Mrs. Walsh, offering feedback and encouragement from the perspective of someone who understood his journey. "You have to do this," Maya insisted one afternoon, as they sat on the steps of her grandmother's trailer, watching the sun set over the Tennessee hills. "I've heard you play dozens of times, and you're ready, more than ready." "What if I mess up?" Ethan asked, voicing the fear that had been growing stronger as the talent show approached. "What if people think I'm not good enough to have Reba's guitar?" Maya turned to face him directly, her green eyes flashing with determination. "Ethan Rodriguez, that guitar chose you as much as she did, and anyone who hears you play knows you deserve it." The week before the talent show, Ethan's nerves began to affect his playing. During his lesson with Mrs. Walsh, he stumbled through pieces he had mastered months earlier, his fingers fumbling on chord changes that should have been automatic. "Stage fright," Mrs. Walsh diagnosed calmly. "Perfectly normal. Even Reba McEntire gets nervous before big performances." "Really?" Ethan asked, finding it hard to believe that someone so accomplished could still feel nervous. "She told me so herself," Mrs. Walsh replied with a knowing smile. "The night of the charity concert, while you were helping Jake set up equipment, she mentioned that intimate performances like that one actually made her more nervous than arena shows. When you care about connecting with your audience, nerves are inevitable." Mrs. Walsh walked over to her piano and played a soft, calming melody. "The secret isn't eliminating nervousness, it's channeling it into your performance. Those butterflies in your stomach, they mean you care, and caring is what makes music meaningful." She turned back to Ethan with a serious expression. "I want to tell you something that might help with your confidence. Last week I wrote a letter to Reba's management company, updating them on your progress. I sent along a recording of your original song. Ethan's eyes widened. You did what? Jake Morrison called me back yesterday, Mrs. Walsh continued, clearly enjoying Ethan's surprised reaction. He said they were all impressed by how much you've improved. And Reba wanted you to know she's proud of the work you've been doing. The validation from his musical hero gave Ethan the confidence boost he desperately needed. That evening, he practiced his talent show performance one final time, playing for his mother and Maya in the cramped living room of their trailer. Sarah Rodriguez had changed significantly in the months since the charity concert. While their financial situation remained challenging, she had found stability in her job at the diner and had begun taking night classes in accounting at the local community college. More importantly, watching her son's musical development had given her a sense of hope for the future that she hadn't felt since Miguel's death. "Mijo, that was beautiful," Sarah said after Ethan finished his song. "Your father would be so proud of the young man you're becoming." The night of the talent show, the high school auditorium was packed with families, friends, and curious community members. Ethan waited backstage, the Martin D28 across his lap, watching as dancers, singers, and comedians took their turns on stage. The performances ranged from polished to amateur, but each act was received with enthusiastic applause from the supportive crowd. "Ethan Rodriguez, you're on in 5 minutes," the stage manager announced, a senior student with a clipboard and a headset who took her role very seriously. Maya appeared beside him, having snuck backstage despite being told to stay in the audience. "How are you feeling?" she asked, noting the slight tremor in his hands. "Terrified," Ethan admitted honestly. "What if I forget the words? What if I break a string? What if people think I'm just showing off because I have an expensive guitar?" "What if you're amazing?" Maya countered. "What if this is the moment that changes everything for you? What if you stop worrying about what could go wrong and start thinking about what could go right?" The student ahead of him finished her dance routine to thunderous applause, and suddenly, it was time. Ethan walked onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding him as he made his way to the single stool that had been placed center stage. As his eyes adjusted, he could see the audience, hundreds of faces looking up at him expectantly. In the front row, he spotted his mother and Dorothy Walsh, both beaming with pride and encouragement. Maya had somehow managed to sneak back to her seat and was giving him an enthusiastic thumbs up. "Good evening," Ethan said into the microphone, his voice slightly shaky but audible throughout the auditorium. "My name is Ethan Rodriguez, and I'd like to play an original song for you tonight." He adjusted the Martin D28 on his lap and took a deep breath. The familiar weight of the guitar was comforting, and as his fingers found their positions on the fretboard, his nervousness began to transform into focus. The opening notes of his song filled the auditorium, the Martin's rich tone carrying perfectly through the sound system. Ethan had chosen to perform Father's Hands, the original composition he had been working on with Mrs. Walsh. It was a deeply personal song about loss, memory, and the way love transcends death. I can still feel my father's hands, guiding mine across the strings, teaching me that music lives in simple, honest things. Though he's gone, his voice remains in every note I play, and I know he's listening somewhere when I sing. As Ethan sang, something magical happened. The nervousness that had plagued him all week disappeared, replaced by a profound connection to both the song and the audience. He could see people in the crowd leaning forward, caught up in the emotional honesty of his performance. The song built to its climactic bridge, where Ethan's fingerpicking became more complex, the Martin D28 seeming to sing with a voice of its own. His lyrics spoke of hope emerging from grief, of finding purpose in honoring the memory of those we've lost. So I'll keep playing, keep singing, keep reaching for the light, carrying his love with me through every dark and lonely night. These hands he taught to make music will never forget the way his love lives on in every song, in every note I play. When the final chord rang out and faded into silence, the auditorium was absolutely quiet for a moment that felt like forever. Then, as if awakening from a dream, the audience erupted into applause. People rose to their feet, and Ethan could see tears in many eyes, including his mother's. As he left the stage, Ethan felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything he had ever experienced. He hadn't just performed a song, he had shared a piece of his soul with hundreds of people, and they had responded with genuine emotion and appreciation. The talent show continued with several more acts, but it was clear to everyone in attendance that something special had happened during Ethan's performance. When the judges announced the winners at the end of the evening, Ethan was named the overall champion, receiving a trophy and a small cash prize that would help his family with expenses. But more importantly, he had proven to himself that he belonged on stage with Reba's guitar. The instrument hadn't made him a better musician. His dedication, practice, and natural talent had done that. But it had given him the confidence to believe in himself and the tools to express his musical vision at the highest level. After the show, Ethan was surrounded by well-wishers and new fans. Teachers who had never noticed him before praised his performance. Classmates asked about his guitar, and several parents inquired about whether he gave lessons. Most meaningfully, Dorothy Walsh approached him with tears of pride in her eyes. "Ethan, in 40 years of teaching, I've never been more proud of a student. You didn't just play music tonight, you became music." As the family drove home from the talent show, Sarah Rodriguez reached over and squeezed her son's hand. "Mijo, tonight I saw your father in you, not just in your music, but in your courage, your heart, your determination to honor his memory while building your own future." That night, Ethan sat on the steps of their trailer with the Martin D28 playing softly in the moonlight. Maya joined him, as she had so many times before, but this time their conversation was different. "You know you can't stay in Millfield forever, right?" Maya said gently. "Tonight proved that you're ready for bigger stages, bigger opportunities." Ethan had been thinking the same thing, though he hadn't wanted to admit it to himself. His talent had grown beyond what their small town could nurture, and he was beginning to understand that honoring Reba's gift meant pursuing music at the highest level possible. "Nashville," he said quietly, the word carrying both excitement and fear. "Nashville," Maya agreed, "but not yet. You're still only 15 and you have more to learn. But someday, sooner than you think, you're going to have to take that leap." As they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of rural Tennessee, Ethan thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. From a broken guitar and broken dreams to a talent show victory, and the dawning realization that his future might be bigger than he had ever imagined. The Martin D28 had been more than a gift. It had been a catalyst, pushing him to work harder, dream bigger, and believe in possibilities that once seemed impossible. And while he still had years of growth and learning ahead of him, tonight had proven that Reba McEntire's faith in him was justified. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed across the Tennessee hills, carrying with it the promise of journeys yet to come. Ethan smiled, his fingers finding a gentle melody on the guitar strings, and began to plan for the day when he would follow that whistle toward whatever destiny awaited him. The boy who had received a broken guitar from his father and a perfect one from a country music legend was becoming the young man who would someday take both gifts and transform them into something entirely his own. 2 years had passed since the talent show that launched Ethan Rodriguez's reputation as Millfield's most promising young musician. At 17, he had grown taller and more confident, but the humble determination that had impressed Reba McEntire remained unchanged. The Martin D28 showed gentle signs of constant use, not damage, but the subtle wear marks that come when an instrument is truly loved and played every day. Ethan now worked part-time at Patterson's hardware store, owned by Maya's uncle, to help support his family and save money for his future musical ambitions. The job was demanding, stocking shelves, helping customers, and handling deliveries. But it gave him the satisfaction of contributing to his household's financial stability while still leaving time for music. "Ethan, can you help Mrs. Henderson load these paint cans into her truck?" called Tom Patterson, a man in his 50s who had given Ethan the job partly out of community loyalty, but had kept him on because of his strong work ethic. "Yes, sir," Ethan replied, setting down the inventory clipboard he had been working on. Mrs. Henderson was a regular customer, a widow who was slowly renovating the house she had shared with her late husband. She always asked specifically for Ethan's help, not just because he was strong and polite, but because she enjoyed hearing about his musical progress. "I heard you played at the Riverside Church fundraiser last month," Mrs. Henderson said, as Ethan loaded the heavy cans into her pickup truck. "My sister was there and said you had the whole congregation in tears." Ethan smiled modestly. Over the past 2 years, his reputation had grown throughout the region. He performed regularly at local events, church services, and small venues, always with the Martin D28, and always with the same emotional authenticity that had characterized his talent show performance. "It was a good crowd," Ethan replied diplomatically. "The song was about community coming together during difficult times. I think it resonated with people." What Ethan didn't mention was that his performances had begun attracting attention from beyond Millfield. A music blogger from Nashville had attended the church fundraiser and written a glowing review that was starting to circulate in industry circles. Dorothy Walsh had shown him the article, and while he was flattered by the recognition, it also made him acutely aware of the growing pressure to make decisions about his future. After work, Ethan made his usual stop at Mrs. Walsh's house. At 75, she remained his primary music teacher, but their lessons had evolved far beyond basic guitar instruction. They now worked on advanced composition, music theory, performance psychology, and the business aspects of a music career. "We need to talk about college applications," Mrs. Walsh said, as soon as Ethan settled into his usual chair in her living room. "The Berklee School of Music application deadline is approaching, and I think you should seriously consider applying." Ethan had been dreading this conversation. Berklee College of Music in Boston was one of the most prestigious contemporary music schools in the country, but it was also expensive and far from home. The thought of leaving his mother, Maya, and Mrs. Walsh felt overwhelming. "I don't know if we can afford it," Ethan said honestly. "Even with financial aid, it would be a huge burden on Mom." "There are scholarships available for talented students," Mrs. Walsh replied gently. "And Berklee has an excellent program for singer-songwriters. You've outgrown what I can teach you here in Millfield." The admission stung slightly, though Ethan knew it wasn't meant as criticism. Mrs. Walsh had given him an incredible foundation, but he was beginning to feel the limitations of his small-town musical education. "What if I'm not ready for that level of competition?" Ethan asked, voicing his deeper fear. "What if I get there and realize I'm just a small-town kid who got lucky once?" Mrs. Walsh set down her cup of tea and looked at him with the stern expression she reserved for moments when her students needed tough love. "Ethan Rodriguez, self-doubt is normal, but false modesty is a waste of time. You've grown into one of the finest young musicians I've ever taught. That Martin D28 hasn't made you special. You've made it special. And it's time you started believing in yourself as much as others believe in you." That evening, Ethan walked home through downtown Millfield, his guitar case slung over his shoulder and his mind churning with possibilities and fears. The town looked smaller to him now than it had 2 years ago, not because it had changed, but because his perspective had expanded. He found Maya waiting for him on the steps of his family's trailer, as she had done countless times over the years. At 17, she had grown into a beautiful young woman with sharp intelligence and unwavering loyalty to her friends. She had been accepted to the University of Tennessee to study journalism, with plans to specialize in music writing. "You look like someone who just had a serious conversation about the future," Maya observed as Ethan sat down beside her. "Mrs. Walsh wants me to apply to Berklee," Ethan said without preamble. "She thinks I'm ready for that level of music education." Maya was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. "What do you think?" "I think I'm terrified," Ethan replied honestly. "I think part of me wants to stay here forever, playing music for people I know and care about. And I think another part of me knows that if I don't take risks now, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. The Ethan I've known for 3 years isn't someone who settles for safe choices," Maya said thoughtfully. "You've been pushing yourself musically since the day Reba gave you that guitar. College would just be the next step in that journey." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set behind the Tennessee hills. These evening conversations had been a constant in Ethan's life, and the thought of leaving them behind was almost as difficult as leaving his family. "Maya," Ethan said eventually, "when you go to UT next year, are you going to miss all this?" "Every single day," she replied without hesitation. "But I'm also excited about what comes next. Growth requires leaving comfort zones even when it hurts." That night, Ethan lay in bed with college brochures spread around him, trying to imagine himself in Boston, surrounded by other serious musicians from around the world. The thought was both thrilling and intimidating. His mother knocked softly on his bedroom door. "Can I come in, mijo?" Sarah Rodriguez had continued to grow stronger over the past 2 years. She had completed her accounting degree and now worked as a bookkeeper for a local business, providing much-needed stability for their household. More importantly, she had rediscovered her own sense of purpose and possibility. "Mrs. Walsh called me today," Sarah said, sitting on the edge of Ethan's bed. "She told me about her college recommendation." Ethan braced himself for his mother's concerns about money and distance, but Sarah's expression was thoughtful rather than worried. "Your father always said that talent without opportunity is tragedy," Sarah continued. "When he came to this country, he had dreams bigger than what he ultimately achieved. But he always hoped that you would have chances he never had." She picked up one of the college brochures and studied it carefully. "Miguel would want you to take this risk. And I want you to know that we'll figure out a way to make it work financially." Ethan felt tears welling up in his eyes. "Mom, I don't want to leave you here alone." Sarah smiled with a mixture of sadness and pride. "Mijo, I'm not alone. I have friends, I have a job I enjoy, and I have a son who is about to chase his dreams the way his father always hoped he would. That's not loneliness, that's fulfillment." The college application process consumed Ethan's fall semester. In addition to Berklee, he applied to several other music programs, each requiring audition recordings, essays, and academic transcripts. Mrs. Walsh helped him prepare a portfolio that showcased his growth as both a performer and a songwriter. For his primary audition recording, Ethan chose to perform "Father's Hands," the song that had won the high school talent show, along with 2 other original compositions and a cover of a complex fingerstyle arrangement. He recorded everything in Mrs. Walsh's living room, using professional equipment borrowed from a recording studio in Nashville. The most challenging part of the application process was the personal essay. How could he explain the journey that had brought him from a broken guitar and broken dreams to this moment of possibility? How could he convey the impact that Reba McEntire's gift had made on his life without sounding like he was trying to impress admissions committees with celebrity connections? Finally, he decided to write honestly about loss, community, and the transformative power of believing in someone's potential. He wrote about his father's death, his family's struggles, and the night when a country music legend saw something in a shy teenager that even he hadn't recognized in himself. The Martin D28 guitar that sits beside me as I write this essay is more than an instrument, Ethan concluded in his personal statement. It's a reminder that we all have the power to change someone's life through acts of kindness and faith. Someday I hope to pass that gift forward, whether through music, teaching, or simply believing in someone else's potential, the way Reba McEntire believed in mine. The waiting period after submitting applications was agonizing. Ethan threw himself into his music and his job at the hardware store, trying not to obsess over mailboxes and email notifications. He continued performing at local venues, building his reputation and his repertoire. In February, the acceptance letters began arriving. First came the University of Tennessee's music program, offering him a partial scholarship. Then, Middle Tennessee State University, also with financial aid. Each acceptance was encouraging, but Ethan found himself holding his breath for news from Berklee. The letter arrived on a cold Thursday morning in March. Ethan's hands shook as he opened the envelope, afraid to hope for good news, but unable to prepare himself for disappointment. "Dear Mr. Rodriguez," the letter began, "we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to Berklee College of Music's singer-songwriter program for the fall semester. Furthermore, Based on the exceptional quality of your audition materials and personal statement, you have been selected to receive the Berklee Achievement Scholarship, which will cover 75% of your tuition costs. Ethan read the letter 3 times before the words fully sank in. Not only had he been accepted to one of the most competitive music schools in the country, but he had received a scholarship that would make attendance financially feasible. He called Mrs. Walsh first, then Maya, then his mother at work. Each conversation was filled with excitement, pride, and the bittersweet knowledge that his life in Millfield was about to change forever. That evening, as word spread throughout the community, Ethan's trailer became the center of an impromptu celebration. Neighbors, friends, teachers, and customers from the hardware store stopped by to congratulate him and express their pride in his achievement. Tom Patterson arrived with a case of soda and a broad smile. "I always knew you'd outgrow our little hardware store," he said, clapping Ethan on the back. "But I'm proud to have been part of your journey." As the evening wound down and the visitors departed, Ethan found himself alone with Maya on their familiar perch on the trailer steps. The Martin D28 lay across his lap, and he played softly in the moonlight. "4 months," Maya said quietly. "Then we both leave for college." "Are you going to miss this?" Ethan asked, gesturing toward the trailer park, the town beyond, and the life they had shared. "Of course," Maya replied, "but I'm excited to see what you do next, and I'm excited to write about it when you become famous." Ethan laughed, but there was serious undertone to Maya's prediction. The acceptance to Berklee represented more than just educational opportunity. It was validation that his musical journey was following a trajectory that could lead to professional success. "Promise me something," Ethan said, as they prepared to go inside for the night. "Anything," Maya replied. "Promise me that no matter how far we go or what we achieve, we'll remember this. We'll remember where we came from and the people who helped us get there." Maya smiled and extended her hand for their traditional handshake, a ritual they had maintained since childhood. "I promise. And you promise me you'll remember that talent without courage means nothing. Don't let anyone in Boston convince you that small-town dreams are small dreams." As spring turned to summer, Ethan's final months in Millfield took on a poignant quality. Every performance, every lesson with Mrs. Walsh, every conversation with his mother carried the weight of endings and beginnings. He was grateful for the opportunities ahead, but he was also grieving the loss of the familiar rhythms that had shaped his adolescence. The Martin D28 guitar that had sparked this journey would soon travel to Boston, where it would be played in dormitory rooms and practice halls, where it would compete with instruments owned by students from around the world. But no matter where it traveled, it would carry with it the memory of a small town in Tennessee, a grieving family, and a country music legend who saw potential in a shy teenager with a broken guitar and unbroken dreams. The boy who had once been overwhelmed by the gift of a professional instrument was now preparing to become worthy of it in ways he had never imagined possible. 7 years had passed since that life-changing night at the Millfield Community Center, and Ethan Rodriguez now stood in the wings of the Grand Ole Opry House in Nashville, his father's original Yamaha guitar case in one hand, and Reba McEntire's Martin D28 in its familiar case slung over his shoulder. At 21, he had grown into a confident young man whose boyish features had been refined by years of dedication and hard work, but his eyes still held the same genuine warmth that had impressed a country music legend years ago. The journey from Millfield to this moment had been neither straight nor easy. After graduating from Berklee College of Music with honors, Ethan had spent 2 years in Nashville, working as a session musician, songwriter for hire, and coffee shop performer, while trying to break into an industry that chewed up talented young musicians and spit them out with heartbreaking regularity. Tonight, however, was different. Tonight, he was the opening act for Reba McEntire's acoustic tour, a 20-city run of intimate venues that would culminate at the hallowed stage where he now waited. It was a dream come true, but more than that, it was a chance to complete the circle that had begun in a small Tennessee town when he was just 14 years old. 5 minutes, Ethan," called Jenny Morrison, Jake's younger sister who now worked as Reba's tour manager. The Morrison family had kept track of Ethan's progress over the years, and when an opening slot had become available, Jake had recommended him without hesitation. Ethan nodded, trying to calm the familiar pre-performance butterflies that still fluttered in his stomach before important shows. Some things never changed, and he had learned to appreciate his nerves as a sign that he still cared deeply about connecting with his audience. In the front row of the sold-out Opry House, Sarah Rodriguez sat beside Dorothy Walsh, both women beaming with pride and anticipation. Sarah had driven up from Millfield that morning, taking her first day off from her accounting job in 2 years, to watch her son perform at country music's most sacred venue. Dorothy Walsh, now 80, had made the trip despite her advancing age and increasing mobility challenges. She wouldn't have missed this moment for anything in the world. Beside her sat Maya Patterson, now 21 herself, and working as a music journalist for Rolling Stone magazine. She had covered Ethan's rise in the music industry with professional objectivity in her articles. But tonight she was simply his oldest friend, here to witness the culmination of a journey they had shared since childhood. Also in the audience, though Ethan didn't know it yet, were several record label executives who had been quietly following his career. His reputation as both a performer and songwriter had grown steadily over the past 2 years, and tonight's performance at the Opry was being seen as a potential breakthrough moment. Ladies and gentlemen, Reba McEntire's voice filled the historic auditorium as she stepped onto the stage. I have a very special treat for you tonight. 7 years ago, I met a young man at a charity event in a small Tennessee town. He was 14 years old, grieving the loss of his father and playing a broken guitar with missing strings. But when I heard him play, I knew I was witnessing something special. The audience listened intently as Reba continued her introduction, unaware that they were about to hear a story that had become legend in Nashville's songwriter circles. I gave that young man my guitar that night, a 1975 Martin D28 that had been with me for 20 years. I told him it was an investment in his future, and I asked him to promise me 3 things: that he would keep playing, that he would help other young musicians if he ever made it in the business, and that he would remember that his dreams were never too big. Reba paused, her smile visible even from the wings where Ethan waited. Tonight, that young man returns to the stage with that same guitar, and I'm proud to tell you that he's kept every one of those promises. Please welcome Ethan Rodriguez. The applause was thunderous as Ethan walked onto the Opry stage, the Martin D28 in his hands, and his heart pounding with the magnitude of the moment. The historic venue, with its iconic circle of worn wood at center stage, represented the pinnacle of country music achievement. To perform here was to join the ranks of legends, and Ethan felt the weight of that honor with every step. He took his place at the single microphone, adjusting the Martin D28 with the familiarity of 7 years of constant companionship. The guitar felt perfect in his hands, its weight and balance as natural as breathing. "Good evening," Ethan said, his voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium without a trace of the nervousness he felt inside. "When I was 14 years old, I thought my life was over. My father had died, my family was struggling, and my dreams seemed impossible. Then one night, a woman I had only seen on television walked into our community center and changed everything." He looked out at the audience, finding the faces of his mother, Mrs. Walsh, and Maya in the front row. Their presence gave him strength and grounded him in the moment. The guitar I'm holding tonight was a gift from Reba McEntire, given to a scared, grieving teenager who didn't believe in himself. She saw something in me that I couldn't see, and she invested in a future that seemed impossible at the time. Ethan began to play the opening chords of "Father's Hands," the song that had launched his performing career at the high school talent show. But this version was different, more mature, more nuanced, reflecting 7 years of growth as both a musician and a human being. I can still feel my father's hands, guiding mine across the strings, teaching me that music lives in simple, honest things. Though he's gone, his voice remains in every note I play, and I know he's listening somewhere when I sing. The song filled the Opry House with its emotional honesty, and Ethan could see people throughout the audience wiping away tears. But this performance was different from his earlier versions of the song. It now included additional verses about growth, hope, and the people who had helped him along the way. Now I stand on stages where legends once have stood, carrying the love of those who believed I could. Every chord is gratitude, every word a prayer, for the gifts of faith and music that brought me here. When the song ended, the applause was sustained and heartfelt. Ethan had not just performed. He had shared his story, his heart, and his gratitude with an audience that understood the power of music to transform lives. "This next song," Ethan said as the applause faded, "is brand new. I wrote it last week and tonight will be its first performance anywhere. It's called The Guitar That Changed Everything." What followed was a musical autobiography, a song that told the complete story of Ethan's journey from that night in the community center to this moment on the Opry stage. The lyrics wove together themes of loss and hope, community and individual achievement, the transformative power of kindness, and the responsibility that comes with being given opportunities others don't receive. In a small-town trailer park, where dreams seemed far away, a broken guitar and broken heart waited for better days. Then an angel dressed in denim with fire-red hair saw a future in my fingers and a song that wasn't there. She gave me more than music, more than wood and steel. She gave me proof that kindness and believing both are real. Now I carry her investment everywhere I go. The guitar that changed everything still has more love to show. The final verse of the song addressed his promise to help other young musicians. And as he sang it, Ethan thought about the scholarship fund he had already begun establishing with his early earnings as a professional musician. "So I'll keep the promise that I made that winter night, to pass along the blessing, to help others find their light. 'Cause we all need someone to believe in what we are, and sometimes hope arrives disguised as an old guitar." When the song ended, the audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Ethan stood at the microphone, overwhelmed by the response and by the emotional significance of the moment. But the evening's surprises were not over. As the applause began to fade, Reba McEntire walked onto the stage, her own guitar in hand and tears visible on her cheeks. "That," she said into her microphone, "is why I love country music. It's why I love this business, despite all its challenges and heartbreaks. It's because sometimes, just sometimes, we get to be part of stories like this one." She moved to stand beside Ethan at center stage. "7 years ago, I gave this young man a guitar and asked him to make me proud. Tonight, he's done that in ways I never could have imagined." Reba turned to address Ethan directly. "You've kept your promises, all of them. You've never stopped playing and learning. You've already started helping other young musicians through your scholarship fund. And you've proven that no dream is too big if you're willing to work for it." She paused, her voice thick with emotion. "But I have one more request. Would you play with me tonight? Would you help me perform a song for all these wonderful people?" Ethan's eyes widened with surprise and honor. To perform alongside Reba McEntire at the Grand Ole Opry was beyond anything he had dared to imagine when he was that scared 14-year-old boy. "It would be my privilege," Ethan replied, his voice barely steady. What followed was a magical 20 minutes of music. Reba and Ethan performed several songs together, some of her classics, one of his new compositions, and a few traditional country standards that showcased both their voices and their instrumental skills. The Martin D28 and Reba's current guitar created a perfect harmonic blend, as if the instruments remembered their shared history. For the final song of Ethan's set, they performed "The Greatest Love of All," reimagined as a country duet about believing in children's potential and nurturing their dreams. It was a perfect culmination of the evening's themes and a powerful statement about the responsibility of established artists to support emerging talent. When their duet ended, the standing ovation continued for nearly 10 minutes. People in the audience were openly weeping, moved by the authenticity of the performance and the beauty of the story they had witnessed. As Ethan prepared to leave the stage, Reba embraced him warmly. "Thank you," she whispered in his ear. "Thank you for making that guitar mean something even more beautiful than it did when I gave it to you." Backstage, Ethan was immediately surrounded by well-wishers, industry professionals, and family members. The emotion of the performance was still coursing through his veins, and he felt both exhilarated and emotionally drained. Sarah Rodriguez was the first to reach him, tears streaming down her face as she embraced her son. "Mijo, your father was here tonight," she said softly. "I felt him in every note you played." Dorothy Walsh, leaning on her walking cane but with eyes bright with pride, squeezed Ethan's hand. "That was more than a performance," she said. "That was testimony to the power of music to transform lives. I've never been more proud to be your teacher." Maya arrived with her journalist's notebook forgotten in her purse, her professional objectivity completely abandoned in favor of friendship and shared joy. "I've covered dozens of concerts for Rolling Stone," she said, hugging him tightly. "But I've never seen anything like what just happened out there. You didn't just perform, you completed a circle that started 7 years ago." Among the crowd backstage were several faces Ethan didn't immediately recognize, executives from major record labels who had been impressed by his performance and wanted to discuss his future. But those conversations would wait. Tonight was about celebrating with the people who had made his journey possible. Jake Morrison appeared at Ethan's shoulder, his face beaming with satisfaction. "You know," Jake said, "when I first met you, you were this shy kid helping us set up equipment. I knew you had talent, but tonight, you became an artist. There's a difference, and you just showed everyone what it is." As the evening wound down and the crowds began to disperse, Ethan found himself in the empty auditorium with just his family and closest friends. The Grand Ole Opry House, which had been electric with energy an hour earlier, was now quiet and peaceful, filled only with the ghosts of legendary performances and the echo of his own breakthrough moment. "I need to tell you all something," Ethan said, his voice carrying in the hushed space. "Everything that happened tonight was because of what each of you gave me. Mom, you taught me to work hard and never give up. Mrs. Walsh, you taught me that music is about emotion, not just technique. Maya, you taught me to believe in myself, even when I couldn't see my own worth." He paused, looking around at the faces that had been constant sources of support and love throughout his journey. "And Reba," he continued, though she had left for her own performance preparations, "gave me the tools to turn dreams into reality. But all of you gave me something even more important. You gave me roots. No matter how far this career takes me, I'll always know where I come from and who helped me get here." 3 months after his Grand Ole Opry debut, Ethan Rodriguez signed a recording contract with Big Machine Records, one of Nashville's most respected independent labels. His debut album, The Guitar That Changed Everything, was scheduled for release the following spring, with the title track as the lead single. But success in the music industry hadn't changed his fundamental character. He still called his mother every Sunday, still visited Mrs. Walsh whenever he was in Millfield, and still maintained his friendship with Maya despite their busy careers and geographic separation. Most importantly, he had already begun fulfilling his promise to help other young musicians. The Rodriguez Foundation for Young Musicians had been established with his signing bonus, providing instruments, lessons, and scholarship opportunities for talented children from low-income families throughout Tennessee and beyond. On a warm Saturday afternoon in October, exactly 7 years after his first meeting with Reba McEntire, Ethan returned to the Millfield Community Center. But this time, he wasn't there as a teenager helping with setup. He was there as the featured performer at the annual Miguel Rodriguez Memorial Benefit Concert, an event established in his father's honor to support families affected by workplace accidents. The community center looked much the same as it had 7 years earlier, though it now boasted a small plaque near the entrance commemorating the night when country music history was made in their modest venue. Ethan smiled when he saw the plaque, remembering how impossible it had seemed that anything historically significant could happen in their small town. As soundcheck began, Ethan carefully removed both guitars from their cases, his father's restored Yamaha FG 180, which he had had professionally refurbished the previous year, and Reba's Martin D28, which showed the gentle wear of 7 years of constant use, but remained in perfect playing condition. "Which one are you going to play tonight?" asked Maya, who had driven down from Nashville to cover the benefit concert for a feature article about musicians giving back to their communities. "Both," Ethan replied with a smile. "Dad's guitar for the opening songs. It seems right to honor his memory with the instrument he taught me on, and Reba's guitar for the closing numbers, including the new song I've been working on." The new song was called Full Circle, and it was Ethan's reflection on the journey that had brought him back to where it all began. It explored themes of gratitude, responsibility, and the importance of remembering one's origins, even while pursuing ambitious dreams. As evening approached, and the community center filled with familiar faces, many of whom had been present 7 years earlier, Ethan felt a profound sense of completion. He wasn't the same person who had left Millfield for college 4 years ago, but he was still recognizably himself, still connected to the values and relationships that had shaped his character. The concert began with Ethan alone on stage with his father's guitar, performing some of Miguel Rodriguez's favorite country classics. The restored Yamaha sounded beautiful, its tone rich and warm, and Ethan could feel his father's presence in every note. "This guitar," Ethan told the audience during a break between songs, "taught me my first chords, listened to my first songs, and absorbed my tears when I thought music would never be enough to build a life on. Tonight, it's getting the chance to come home." The middle portion of the concert featured several of Ethan's original compositions, including songs from his upcoming album. The audience, a mixture of longtime Millfield residents and music industry professionals who had made the trip from Nashville, responded enthusiastically to each performance. But the evening's most powerful moment came when Ethan switched to the Martin D28 for his final set. As he settled the familiar guitar against his body, he felt the same sense of possibility and potential that had overwhelmed him 7 years earlier. "7 years ago," Ethan said, his voice carrying easily through the packed community center, "I was sitting in the back of this room, holding a broken guitar and wondering if my life would ever get better. A woman I had only seen on television was performing right here on this same stage, and I was just grateful to be in the room." He adjusted the guitar and smiled at the memories. "That woman saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. She gave me this guitar, but more than that, she gave me permission to believe that my dreams weren't too big. Tonight, I want to pay that gift forward." What followed was the announcement that had been kept secret until that moment. The Rodriguez Foundation for Young Musicians was partnering with the Millfield Community Center to establish a permanent music education program. Local children would receive free guitar lessons, have access to quality instruments, and be given the same opportunities that had transformed Ethan's life. "Every child in this community who wants to learn music will have that opportunity," Ethan announced to thunderous applause. "Because talent exists everywhere, but opportunity doesn't. Tonight we're going to change that for the kids growing up here." The concert concluded with Full Circle, Ethan's new song about completing journeys and honoring obligations. As he played, he could see faces in the audience that represented every stage of his musical development: teachers, mentors, friends, family members, and industry professionals who had all played roles in his success. "I started with a broken guitar and a broken heart. Didn't know that sometimes endings are where new stories start. Now I'm back where I began, but I'm not the same. Carrying the love forward, playing life's eternal game. Full circle, full circle. Everything comes around. The gifts we receive are meant to be passed down. Full circle, from here to there and back. Home is where we learn to give what we think we lack." After the concert ended and the last audience member had left, Ethan found himself alone in the community center with both guitars. The space was quiet now, but he could feel the weight of all the history that had unfolded within these walls, not just his own story, but the countless other lives that had been touched by music and community support over the years. He played quietly for a few minutes, switching between both instruments, reflecting on the journey that had brought him full circle. The scared 14-year-old boy who had helped set up chairs for Reba McEntire's charity concert had grown into a successful recording artist, but more importantly, he had grown into someone who understood the responsibility that comes with being given exceptional opportunities. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. When he opened it, he found a photo from that evening's concert along with a brief note. "Proud of you for keeping your promises. Keep making that guitar sing. R." Reba McEntire had been quietly following his career, and her message was a reminder that some gifts create lifelong connections between giver and receiver. The Martin D28 was more than just an instrument. It was a symbol of faith, investment, and the transformative power of believing in someone's potential. As Ethan packed both guitars into their cases, preparing to return to Nashville and his recording career, he felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought him to this moment. He had learned that success wasn't just about individual achievement. It was about honoring the people who had invested in your dreams and using your opportunities to create possibilities for others. The boy who had received a guitar from his father and another from a country music legend had become a man who understood that the greatest gift he could give was to pass both instruments' legacies forward to the next generation of dreamers. Outside, the Tennessee night was clear and filled with stars. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed across the hills, carrying the same promise of journeys and possibilities that it had carried 7 years earlier. But this time, Ethan wasn't dreaming of leaving. He was celebrating the joy of coming home, of completing a circle, and of beginning the next chapter of a story that had started with broken strings and was now creating beautiful music for others to follow. The guitar that changed everything had indeed changed everything. Not just for one young man, but for an entire community, and all the future musicians whose dreams would be nurtured by the foundation built on that first act of extraordinary kindness. As Ethan drove back toward Nashville, the Martin D28 secure in the passenger seat beside him, he smiled at the thought that somewhere in Millfield tonight, a young person with musical dreams was going to sleep with new hope, knowing that opportunity was no longer something that happened to other people in other places. The circle was complete, but the story was just beginning.